Hi, I'm Dr. Jeff Sankoff, the TriDoc, from the TriDoc podcast and TriDoc Coaching. I'm going to talk to you today a little bit about marginal gains. Now, you're probably familiar with marginal gains when it comes to cycling. The notion is that if you make small incremental changes to your body position or to your equipment, each of them can give you marginal gains, and alone may not add up to a whole bunch, but when you put them together, they can be pretty significant and possibly give you an edge over your competition. We're starting to see the same thing come into swimming with different materials in wetsuits, different materials in speed suits, different shapes and different kinds of configurations and how they're manufactured as well. But the one discipline of triathlon where marginal gains really haven't had a foothold, if you will, is in running, at least until the last year or so. Last year, Nike introduced the Vaporfly 4, otherwise known as the speed shoe, and it's had a real important impact in running circles, but is starting to make its way into triathlon as well. The Vaporfly 4 was developed as part of a project that Nike had in order to try and develop the best materials and the best circumstances in order to help a human being run a marathon in under 2 hours. Now, if you followed that whole project, you know that they came really close, but didn't quite succeed. However, they established that it was definitely a possibility. And as part of that, they came up with this shoe. And it's a pretty impressive model. Something that you've probably seen more and more if you're following any kind of marathon running, and as I said, it's starting to make its way into triathlon, and we'll talk about why in just a second. So what is it exactly that makes the Vaporfly 4 so impressive and such a matter of, if you will, a little bit of controversy? So running shoes have essentially been unchanged over the past, 20 years or so. There's been a little bit of change in the type of materials being used, a little bit of change in the type of styles that you'll see, but all in all, they really don't do a whole lot to actually accentuate your running. Mostly running shoes have been developed to try and prevent injury. With the Vaporfly 4, things change pretty dramatically because now, for the first time, Nike has developed a shoe that they developed specifically to make you faster. And scientific studies, both those funded by Nike and those that have been done independently, really have borne out that fact that these shoes can actually make a runner faster, including age groupers. The New York Times actually did a study where they looked at marathon and half marathon times of people that posted to Strava. They actually correlated those times with people who were wearing these shoes and found that people wearing the shoes saw 2 to 4% gains. The 4, incidentally, in Vaporfly 4 refers to the notion that wearing these shoes can give you a 4% improvement in your overall running. So, what's the science behind the claim and how does it work? The science in the Vaporfly 4 is really predicated on 4 things. First, they're incredibly light. Each shoe weighs in under 8 ounces, and that is, if you know anything about running shoes, really light. Why that's important is because every step that you take requires you to lift not just your leg, but whatever's on your foot up off the ground, carry it forward, and then rest it back on the ground in order to keep moving. Over the course of 26.2 miles, that's a lot of lifting and letting down. If your shoe weighs 10 ounces versus 7 2/3 of an ounce like these do, that's a lot of ounces you got to carry forward over 26.2 miles, and that can make a big difference to the amount of energy being expended. So these shoes are incredibly light and therefore decrease the amount of energy needed to get over those 26.2 miles. The way they've made them so light is in part through the use of a very impressive foam, which comes from the aeronautics industry, a foam that's been used in airplanes, so obviously had to be light in order to get planes off the ground, and has now been used and adapted for these shoes. In addition, the uppers of the shoe is a fly knit, and there's essentially no structure to it at all. They fit on your shoe fit on your foot very much like a sock in a very tight manner, but they're incredibly comfortable despite the fact that they really have minimal structure. The second thing that these shoes do differently from other running shoes is they're incredibly narrow and therefore very aerodynamic. You can even see that the shoe has a tail to it in order to decrease drag as it moves through the air. So again, over the course of 26.2 miles, if they've decreased the drag by really just a tiny fraction, that adds up over time. Again, that concept of marginal gains. The third thing they've done is the foam that they've used is incredibly springy. The first time I put these shoes on, I felt like literally I was walking on shoes that had springs in them. That's how bouncy they actually feel. And that springiness is really important in returning the amount of energy that you use when you're running. When your foot comes down to the ground, rather than losing it in the foam absorbs it and then gives it right back to you. And the fourth thing, and possibly the most important thing that these shoes have, is a carbon fiber plate that runs the length of the sole. It's embedded within the sole and makes these shoes incredibly stiff. Trying to bend these shoes is really difficult. And what that does is when you land, if you land on the forefoot, and then as the shoe starts to bend, the carbon fiber plate actually acts literally like a spring, returning that energy and propelling the shoe and the wearer of the shoe forward. Like I said, there is science and observational data that suggests these shoes actually work. I'm going to wear them tomorrow in a duathlon, and we're going to see. Now that run's only 5K, so it'll be 5K followed by a 34K bike and then another 5K run, but I'll be really interested. Am I going to get a 4% return? We'll find out.
Ricky wakes up feeling frisky, but the Lana doesn't care. She's got no underwear on these days. She doesn't pay him very much attention. He puts his favorite dress on, which really shows a man with looks which is too bad, cause she rarely wore it when they went together to social function. Before she lost concern about the conjunction, they really had it all, the lust, the fun, the trust, that someone became all undone. But she still feels the love is real, she's temptation. Ever since the gun spot of films, she's gonna make the other man, but he isn't now at late. It's 8:15 and he was supposed to meet her there at 7:15. In a race she leaves the restaurant.
Okay, I'm ready to give some thoughts about the Nike Vaporfly 4s. I decided to wait. The duathlon that I did was actually a week ago, and I decided to wait on my first thoughts for one extra week because I knew that I had a 5K this morning. So my thoughts on the shoes are actually based on two separate races. The duathlon, which comprised two 5K runs, and then a 5K that I did this morning. Now, I'm comparing the results that I got in those two races to the similar races that I did, the duathlon a year ago and the 5K 2 years ago. But of course, it's unfair to compare the race results one to the other. For the first reason, the duathlon, of course, and the 5K were done years ago. In one case a year ago, in the other case 2 years ago, and so weather conditions very different, race conditions also very different. In the duathlon, for example, I got off the bike this year really far ahead of everyone else, and I knew that, and so I didn't really run that hard in the second 5K run, and so my times are not really comparable. That was really part and parcel of why I decided to wait to give a review, because I wanted to see in a dedicated 5K whether or not the shoes would provide the kind of return that is promised. The problem with the 5K, you could probably hear on the video that I'm recording right now, it's ridiculously windy today, and so the effort that I had to put in order to get this 5K done today was really way above what I was expecting to have to do, and so the conditions were not at all the same. On top of that, it's 2 years later. I'm 52 versus 50, and that is, not insignificant as a runner. That being said, I do want to give some first impressions. First and foremost, the shoes definitely perform in a way that is surprising. As you're running, you really do appreciate the springiness of them, and they feel a lot more solid and stable than you would expect, given how narrow they are and how light they are, and especially given the lack of structure in the uppers. At no time did I feel like I was going to roll or lose my footing. The duathlon actually had part of the course on concrete and then part of the course on loose sort of gravelish dirt path. Certainly not anything like a trail run, but it was nice solid packed dirt, but there was definitely some loose stuff, and I never felt like I was losing traction or like I was gonna slip or have my ankle roll or anything like that. So the shoes are remarkably stable and really maintain that springiness that you feel when you're walking in them. In terms of the speed that I saw in the first run of the duathlon, the first 5K, I definitely felt like I was able to keep pace with the leaders of the run, who were significantly better runners than I am. and I didn't have to put in the kind of effort that I would have thought that I would have had to. Now, my time was 20 minutes 33 seconds, which is about what I would expect to do in a 5K in a duathlon, especially on that course. The course was modified from what it has been in the previous. Instead of being a loop, it was actually an out and back, so it's not really fair to compare it to what it has been in the past. That being said, I felt very well positioned finishing the run and getting onto the bike because I was able to keep the leaders, who were, as I said, very strong runners, well within sight and very easy to catch on the bike very quickly. The second run, as I said, I didn't even put in a whole bunch of effort. I cruised through the second run, and I dropped a minute off the time from the second run to the first. But again, it didn't really feel like I had to put in as much effort as I would have thought in order to maintain the pace that I was doing. Now again, I confess this could be complete placebo, this could be totally in my head. Where I will say that the shoes really kind of felt different was when in the transition from the gravel patches to the concrete. And I looked at my Strava file, and you can definitely see there was a slight pace change the second that I changed terrain. I did maintain pretty good pace on the gravel, there's no question. It's not like I had a big 10 second per kilometer or anything like that, any kind of major change. But when I transitioned from the gravel to the concrete, I could really feel the benefit of the shoe much more than I did on the dirt part. And that was why, in part also, that I wanted to wait for the 5K today to see how it felt. And so the 5K that I ran today, I ran much smarter than I did 2 years ago. Something that I've struggled with as a runner is going out too fast and not being able to sustain a pace, dropping my pace as the run went on. And over time, I've become much smarter as a runner, and so I start a little bit slower, but because I'm a little more conservative at the beginning, I'm able to negative split my runs even on short courses. Today's course, however, was made exceedingly difficult because of the headwind that we faced on the second of the 3 miles. So I had to expend a lot of energy just to maintain my pace in the second mile. The first mile felt remarkably easy. I ran it at a 6:29 pace, and it just did not feel that hard. We turned into the wind, and in order to keep my pace at 6:29, it was just extraordinarily difficult. We were just into a 10 mile per hour headwind the whole time. But I still managed at 6:31 and felt like, the effort was definitely considerable, regardless shoes or anything. But when we got to the third mile, I was pretty anaerobic for most of the third mile. I was giving everything I could to really try and finish strong. But again, and I confess again that this could be totally placebo, I really did feel like I was letting the shoes do more work than I had to do myself. I felt like the shoes were beneficial in letting me cruise home, putting in the maximal effort I could, but getting a little bit more of a boost than I would have otherwise. My overall time today was a little bit slow because it was, a slow 5K. I mean, the winning time was 16:42, which, if you know anything about 5Ks, and especially in a big race like this one, that was pretty slow, and I think a good signifier of how much the wind affected everyone. So I had my fastest 5K of this year, and I don't run that many, but still, 20:07. I was pretty happy with that time, especially given the conditions, and feel like the shoes definitely helped. Are they worth the expensive, amount of money you got to lay out, $250? And now, of course, I'm recording this on the day that the next percent have been released, and that's up to $275. And of course, Nike doing their best to establish demand by only releasing, I think, 10 pairs today, and getting everybody excited to try and get theirs as soon as they release the next 10 pairs, who knows when. I don't know. It's hard for me to say. I think for me, as a runner who really needs everything that I can get in order to try and compete with those runners who are faster than I am, despite the amount of training that I do, I'll take the marginal gains where I can find them. And this is one example of a marginal gain in running that, I'm willing to lay out a little bit of money to see if I can get maybe a minute or two over a half Ironman. I've only done 5Ks in these shoes, and I'd be interested to see what comes of doing longer distance races. So, it's hard for me to say. Right out of the box, they're, garish. Clearly, Nike has done that on purpose. My wife commented immediately that she hated the color, but then I showed her the finish of the Boston Marathon, and it was very easy for us both to see why Nike chose the color for those shoes, because everybody in the top 3 and top probably 10 of that race were wearing those shoes, and it was very easy to distinguish them. And of course, the next percent are an equally garish lime green. So you can count on Nike keeping the colors looking that way because they're so easy to identify, and because it's going to make it so that, people will notice, will ask questions, and want to buy them. Should the shoes be considered legal equipment? I mean, are they giving or conferring some kind of, advantage that isn't really accessible to people who, say, don't have that kind of money to spend on shoes? Or, is it an illegal equipment kind of advantage? I'm not sure that's a fair argument. Aero helmets are expensive, aero wheels are expensive, aero bikes are expensive, heck, coaches are expensive. These shoes are just like any other kind of equipment, I think. So unless there's something that the shoe is doing to really, give an advantage that people without the shoes don't have, and it's hard for me to imagine that happening, then I would say the shoes should be allowed. And I mean, yes, I think there's an ethical dilemma with cost, but that exists in all of the equipment of triathlon, and unfortunately triathlon is a sport that is expensive, and this is just one more example of where money tends to separate those who may be able to get more benefits than those who can't, and I think that's extremely unfortunate, but it is the way it is. So yeah, those are my thoughts on these shoes. I'd be really interested to hear what you have to say. Please leave me a comment below. I hope you'll consider subscribing to the channel. Let me know if you have ideas for other content that you'd like to see on here, and don't forget to check out my website, www.tridoccoaching.com, as well as the podcast, which you can find on iTunes, Google Play, or Stitcher, as well as the Podbean platform, and that is called the TriDoc podcast, and comes out probably once every 10 days to 2 weeks. Leave me a rating and a review, and we'll talk again soon. Again, I'm Jeff Sankoff, the TriDoc. Thanks for watching.